The gruesome truth about medieval medicine. What it really felt like to get sick in 13. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the sound of church bells clanging somewhere in the distance, their bronze voices cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like rusty knives through silence. Your head throbs with each toll 7 times, marking lauds, the first prayer service of the day. It's still dark outside your small window, if you can call that greased parchment stretched over a wooden frame a window. The year is 1347, and you're lying on what passes for a bed in the English countryside, a straw-stuffed mattress that's seen more bodily fluids than a modern hospital, covered by a wool blanket that feels like it was woven from the dreams of particularly angry sheep. Your name is Thomas, though nobody's called you that in months around here. You're known as Thomas the Tooth Puller's son, which is both more descriptive and slightly more prestigious than Thomas who smells like onions. You're 23 years old, which in medieval terms makes you practically middle-aged, assuming you don't die of something stupid in the next few years, which statistically speaking, you probably will. The first thing that hits you as consciousness crawls back isn't the cold, though the November air in your stone cottage could freeze the prayers right out of your mouth. It's the smell. It's a complex bouquet that would make a modern perfumer weep. Unwashed bodies, wood smoke, something that might charitably be called cooking, and the ever-present aroma of human and animal waste that seems to hang over every medieval settlement like a particularly persistent cloud of despair. You sit up slowly, your joints creaking like the hinges on the church door, and immediately regret it. Your stomach clenches with that familiar hollow ache that means you'll be eating thin gruel again today, assuming there's any grain left. The harvest wasn't good this year, too much rain in July, not enough in August, and everyone's feeling it. Your father, the tooth puller, has been talking about maybe pulling teeth for food instead of coins, which sounds like a terrible business model, but increasingly reasonable given the circumstances. The cottage you call home is essentially a large stone box with delusions of grandeur. One room for the entire family. You, your parents, your 2 younger sisters, and sometimes your uncle when he's not off somewhere being generally useless. The walls are thick stone, which keeps out some of the wind, but none of the dampness. Moisture seeps through everything, the stones, the mortar, your clothes, your bones, your very soul. You've been damp for so long you've forgotten what dry feels like. It's probably overrated anyway. Your bed, such as it is, sits against the far wall separated from your parents' bed by a curtain that's more of a suggestion than actual privacy. You know exactly what goes on behind that curtain because medieval walls are about as soundproof as a fishnet, and your parents are about as quiet as a cart full of pots rolling down a cobblestone street. Let's just say you've learned more about the mechanics of married life than any son should, and leave it at that. The floor beneath your feet is packed dirt swept daily by your mother, but still, somehow always gritty with mud food scraps and things you'd rather not identify. Rushes are scattered across it, long grasses that are supposed to absorb spills and make the place smell better, but mostly just hide the filth and add their own musty decay to the general atmosphere. When the rushes get too disgusting, they're swept out and burned, releasing months of accumulated nastiness into the air in one glorious toxic cloud. You stand up your bare feet, touching the cold earth, and stretch. Your joints pop like someone snapping twigs, which is either a sign of impending arthritis or just what happens when you sleep on a mattress that has all the structural integrity of a week-old loaf of bread. Your spine feels like it's been twisted into a pretzel by someone who's never seen a pretzel but heard them described by a drunk man with a head injury. The family's most prized possession, aside from your father's tooth-pulling tools, is a small wooden chest where your mother keeps her few treasures: a pewter cup that belonged to her grandmother, a bronze brooch she got for her wedding, and a small collection of herbs that serve as both seasoning and medicine. The chest sits in the corner, locked with a mechanism so complex it took your father 3 years to figure out how to open it after your grandfather died. The key was inside the whole time. Light, or what passes for light in this glorious pre-electric age, comes from a couple of sources. There's the fireplace, which provides a flickering orange glow that makes everything look like it's being viewed through amber, and there's a single tallow candle that your mother lights only on special occasions like births, deaths, and those rare evenings when your father manages to pull enough teeth to afford the luxury of seeing what you're eating. Tallow candles, for those fortunate enough to have never encountered them, are made from rendered animal fat and smell like someone decided to improve the scent of burning meat by adding notes of sweaty desperation and economic anxiety. They produce about as much light as a firefly with confidence issues, and they smoke constantly, filling the room with a haze that makes everyone's eyes water and turns simple tasks like finding your shoes into adventures in blindness. The fireplace is the heart of your home, both literally and metaphysically. It provides heat, light, and a place to cook the various roots, grains, and occasional scraps of meat that constitute medieval cuisine. The fire never really goes out. Someone always tends it, banking the coals at night and nursing them back to flame in the morning, because starting a fire from scratch is a production that involves flint steel tinder prayers to various saints and language that would make a crusader blush. Above the fireplace, your mother has hung a collection of herbs to dry: thyme, rosemary, sage, and a few plants she gathered from the forest that she claims will cure everything from headaches to possession by demons. Whether they actually work is debatable, but they certainly smell better than everything else in the cottage, which isn't saying much, but is still appreciated. Your father's tooth-pulling equipment hangs nearby, a collection of iron pliers, hooks, and scrapers that look like they were designed by someone who had heard about teeth but never actually seen any. Medieval dentistry operates on the principle that if something hurts, you should hurt it back until it stops or falls out, whichever comes first. It's surprisingly effective, assuming your definition of effective includes the patient doesn't die immediately. The walls are bare stone, which means they're constantly damp and covered in a thin layer of moisture that freezes in winter and breeds interesting varieties of mold in summer. Your mother has hung a few religious images, crude wooden crosses, a small carved figure of Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of dentistry, which is your father's professional connection to the divine, and a piece of parchment with a Bible verse written in Latin that none of you can actually read, but which the traveling priest assured you would bring good fortune and ward off evil spirits. Storage is a constant challenge in medieval homes, mainly because there isn't any. Everything you own, which isn't much, has to find a place somewhere in this single room. Clothes hang from pegs, driven into the walls. Cooking pots stack in corners, and personal belongings are tucked into whatever nooks and crannies can accommodate them. Privacy is a concept that won't be invented for several more centuries, and personal space is whatever area you can defend with your elbows. Your family's diet consists mainly of bread, porridge ale, and whatever vegetables can survive the local climate's commitment to being as unhelpful as possible. Meat is a rare treat, usually appearing only when an animal dies of old age or accident, at which point it's quickly butchered and preserved before it can decompose further. Fresh fruit is available briefly in late summer. Dried fruit costs more than your father makes in a month, and the concept of balanced nutrition is about as well understood as quantum physics. The bread, when there is any, is dark and dense, made from whatever grains are available, mixed with whatever else might add bulk. barley oats, peas, and in desperate times, sawdust bark and things that might generously be called filler. It's nutritious in the same way that eating your shoes is nutritious. Technically, it contains substances your body can use, but the process of extraction is going to be unpleasant for everyone involved. Ale is the drink of choice for everyone over the age of about 10, not because medieval people were all alcoholics, but because the brewing process made water safer to drink. Water, in its natural medieval state, is a biological weapons laboratory that happens to be wet. Wells are contaminated by runoff from the midden heaps, streams carry the accumulated waste of every village upstream, and rivers are essentially open sewers with delusions of being scenic. Your mother is already awake, moving quietly around the cottage, and that way mothers have perfected across all cultures and centuries the ability to accomplish domestic miracles while making less noise than a whisper. She's stirring the fire back to life, adding small pieces of carefully hoarded wood to the glowing coals and blowing gently until flames begin to lick upward. The wood is precious. Every stick has to be gathered from the Lord's forest with permission, and taking more than allowed is a crime punishable by fines, beatings, or worse. She's also preparing the morning meal, which will be porridge made from whatever grains are available, mixed with water, and maybe a small amount of milk if the cow is feeling cooperative. The cow, whose name is Brunhilde and who has the personality of a hangover with hooves, provides milk sporadically and with great reluctance. She's old, tired, and thoroughly fed up with being a cow, which makes her the spiritual representative of pretty much everyone in the village. Your father is still asleep, snoring with the dedication of someone who spent his life listening to other people scream and considers unconsciousness a well-deserved break. He's lying on his side, his mouth open, drooling slightly onto a pillow that's seen more bodily fluids than a battlefield surgeon. His hands, even in sleep, curl slightly as if gripping invisible pliers, and sometimes he mutters things like "hold still" or "this won't hurt much," which are lies, even in his dreams. Your sisters, Agnes and Margot, are curled together in their small bed like puppies sharing warmth and probably fleas. They're 8 and 10 years old respectively, which in medieval terms makes them practically adults, ready to take on the world, assuming the world doesn't take them on first. Agnes has been coughing lately, a deep, wet sound that makes everyone in the family exchange worried glances when they think she's not looking. Coughs in winter can be anything from a minor irritation to a death sentence, and there's no reliable way to tell which until it's too late. The morning routine in a medieval household is like a carefully choreographed dance if dancers had to worry about dying from minor injuries and wore clothing made from materials that would make a hair shirt feel luxurious. Everyone has their role, everyone knows their place, and everyone understands that a single mistake, a fire going out food, spoiling someone getting sick could cascade into disaster for the entire family. You stumble toward the corner where a wooden bucket serves as the family's latrine because medieval homes operated on the principle that if you can do something indoors, why brave the elements? The bucket will be emptied later into the midden heap behind the cottage, adding to the aromatic pile of waste that serves as both garbage disposal and agricultural fertilizer. It's an efficient system, assuming you don't mind living downwind from your own excrement. Privacy is handled by turning around and pretending not to notice what other people are doing, which is a skill that medieval people developed to a fine art. The concept of bathroom doors won't be invented for centuries, so bodily functions are managed through a combination of strategic positioning, careful timing, and the kind of willful blindness that makes family life possible in a one-room cottage. The water for washing, assuming there's any washing, which is by no means guaranteed, comes from a pitcher that your mother filled yesterday from the village well. It's cold enough to make your teeth ache, brown enough to suggest it might contain more than just water, and scarce enough that using it for anything non-essential is considered wasteful. You splash a small amount on your face, more for the shock value than any actual cleansing effect, and immediately regret it as icy droplets run down your chest beneath your woolen shirt. Medieval hygiene operates on principles that would horrify modern people, but made perfect sense in a world where hot water required building a fire soap was a luxury item, and the prevailing medical theory suggested that bathing might actually make you sicker by opening your pores to disease. People did wash, just not very often, and usually only the parts of their body that were actively interfering with their ability to function in society. Your clothes are simple, practical, and designed to be worn for months at a time without washing. Your shirt is made of rough linen that feels like it was woven from the concentrated essence of discomfort. Your hose are wool and itch constantly, and your tunic is a brown woolen garment that's been patched so many times it's more patched than original fabric. Everything smells like smoke, sweat, and the general mustiness that comes from never being completely dry or completely clean. Shoes are wooden clogs with leather straps that provide about as much protection from the elements as good intentions. They're held together with hope, habit, and the kind of careful maintenance that extends their life far beyond what the original craftsman ever intended. The leather has been oiled, patched, and restitched so many times that it's more oil and thread than actual hide, but they still keep most of your feet off the ground most of the time, which is about as much as you can ask for medieval footwear. Your hair, like everyone else's, is cut with a knife when it gets long enough to interfere with work, which means it's always either too long or recently butchered into something resembling a modern art project. Combs are rare and precious, shared among the entire family and used mainly to remove the larger parasites, rather than for anything resembling styling. Medieval hairstyles were whatever happened naturally modified by occupational hazards and the occasional attempt at improvement with a sharp blade. The cottage begins to wake up around you. Your father stretches, groans, and begins the process of transitioning from horizontal to vertical, which at his age requires careful planning and several false starts. Your sisters stir and whisper to each other in the way children do, sharing secrets that probably involve who saw what animal do which embarrassing thing to whom. Your mother continues her quiet work, the domestic magic that keeps the family functioning despite the best efforts of medieval life to make existence impossible. Outside the village is beginning its daily routine. You can hear the lowing of cattle being driven to whatever passes for pasture in November, the creak and splash of the water wheel at the mill, and the general human noises that indicate civilization is attempting to get organized for another day of survival. Roosters crow with the enthusiasm of creatures who don't realize they're advertising their own eventual fate, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barks at something that's probably completely innocent but might be the end of the world. In medieval times, you can never be too careful. The church bells continue their morning announcements, calling the faithful to prayer and reminding everyone that eternity is watching, taking notes, and probably not impressed with what it sees. Religion in medieval life isn't a weekly obligation. It's a constant presence woven into every activity, every decision, every moment of doubt or despair. God is everywhere. The saints are keeping score, and the devil is looking for any excuse to drag your soul to a place where the accommodations are even worse than your current cottage. Your stomach growls a sound like distant thunder that reminds you that breakfast, such as it will be, is the most important meal of the day, because it might be the only one. Your mother has managed to coax the porridge into something resembling edibility, adding a pinch of precious salt and what might be honey, but is probably tree sap mixed with wishful thinking. It smells like food, which is more than you could say about yesterday's dinner, so you're already ahead of the game. This is your morning routine in 13. Wake up uncomfortable, stay uncomfortable, and begin the day's work of trying to remain alive long enough to wake up uncomfortable again tomorrow. It's not glamorous. It's not easy. And it's definitely not the romanticized medieval fantasy of noble knights and fair ladies that will be invented centuries later by people who never had to empty a chamber pot or sleep on a mattress that was older than their grandparents. But it's your life and you're living it. And that in itself is no small accomplishment in an age where simply making it to adulthood is an achievement worthy of celebration. You're awake, you're breathing, your family is still alive, and the cottage hasn't burned down overnight. By medieval standards, you're having a pretty good day, but something's different this morning as you stand there in your scratchy woolen clothes, trying to convince yourself that tree sap and boiled grain constitutes a proper breakfast. You notice a small, dark spot on your left forearm just below the elbow. It's about the size of a pea, slightly raised, and when you touch it, it feels warm. Warmer than the rest of your skin, which in this November cold isn't saying much, but warm enough to notice. You roll up your sleeve trying to get a better look in the flickering firelight. The spot is definitely there, definitely dark, and definitely wasn't there yesterday. You remember that arm perfectly well. You use it for everything from pulling teeth. Your father's been teaching you the trade, to stirring the porridge, to scratching the persistent itches that come with woolen clothing and questionable hygiene. You would have noticed this yesterday. Your first thought, like any sensible medieval person, is that you've been cursed. Your second thought is that you've been bitten by something venomous. Your third thought is that you're developing leprosy, which would mean being cast out of the village to wander the countryside ringing a bell and shouting unclean to warn people to stay away. None of these possibilities fill you with joy. But then you remember old Godwin from 2 villages over who developed similar spots last month and was dead within a week. The spots had spread, turning black as charcoal, and he'd developed swellings in his neck and under his arms that grew to the size of apples before they finally claimed him. The traveling priest said it was God's judgment for Godwin's notorious habit of watering down his ale, but everyone knew Godwin was honest as bread and twice as useful. If God was smiting ale waterers, half the kingdom would be dead by Christmas. You decide not to mention the spot to your family. Not yet. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just a bruise from yesterday's work, or a bite from some perfectly innocent insect that doesn't carry the seeds of apocalyptic death. Maybe you're just being paranoid, which would be understandable given that paranoia is a perfectly reasonable response to living in an era where minor cuts can turn fatal and strange illnesses appear without warning to devastate entire communities. Instead, you focus on breakfast, which requires the kind of attention to detail usually reserved for diplomatic negotiations. The porridge is hot, which is good. It's also thin enough to see through, which is less good, but not unexpected. Your mother has managed to find a few pieces of bacon to add thin strips of preserved pork that taste like salt-cured leather, but provide the kind of fat and protein your body desperately needs to fuel another day of medieval survival. Your father finally achieves vertical status and begins his own morning routine, which involves checking his tooth-pulling equipment for sharpness, counting his coins to see if yesterday's earnings are sufficient for today's needs, and making the kind of guttural noises that suggest his body is filing formal complaints about being 53 years old in an era when life expectancy hovers somewhere around not very long at all. Thomas, he says, his voice carrying the authority of a man who spent decades convincing people to let him stick metal objects into their mouths. We've got work today. Young Willem's been complaining about a tooth that's been troubling him, and his father finally decided it's worth the cost to have it removed. That's 2 silver pieces if we do it right. 1 if we don't kill him in the process. Medieval dentistry, as you've learned through careful observation and occasional participation, operates on principles that would make modern dentists weep openly. The theory is straightforward. If a tooth hurts, remove it. The practice is somewhat more complex, involving restraints, prayers, strong ale for everyone involved, and the kind of physical strength usually reserved for moving large stones or subduing uncooperative livestock. Your father's tools are simple and effective pliers for gripping hooks for leverage and a small hammer for encouragement. Anesthesia consists of whatever alcohol is available and the patient's personal relationship with various saints who might be convinced to intervene on their behalf. Pain management is handled through the time-tested method of getting it over with as quickly as possible and hoping for the best. The success rate is surprisingly high, assuming you define success as the patient survives the procedure and most of the bleeding stops eventually. Infection is always a risk, but medieval people have developed a certain philosophical acceptance of infection as part of life's rich tapestry, along with famine, warfare, and taxes that seem designed by someone who actively hates human happiness. But as you contemplate a morning of holding down a young man while your father extracts pieces of his anatomy with iron tools, the spot on your arm begins to itch. Not just itch burn like someone's holding a hot coal against your skin. You scratch it reflexively and immediately wish you hadn't, because now it's both burning and tender to the touch. Your mother notices your distraction. Medieval mothers have supernatural powers of observation that allow them to detect problems before the people having the problems are aware they exist. It's a survival skill developed over generations of keeping families alive in hostile environments where ignoring small symptoms can lead to large graves. Thomas, she says, ladling porridge into wooden bowls with the precision of someone who's calculated exactly how much food needs to last until the next meal, and found the mathematics disappointing. You seem troubled this morning. Are you feeling well? This is the moment of truth. Do you tell her about the spot potentially causing family-wide panic and medical consultation fees you can't afford? Or do you lie pretending everything is fine while secretly wondering if you're developing something that will kill you, your family, and possibly everyone in the village? You choose the middle path of medieval communication, partial honesty seasoned with hope and ignorance. I'm fine, mother, just tired. The cold makes my bones ache. This is technically true. The cold does make your bones ache, and you are tired, and you're hoping desperately that you're fine despite all evidence to the contrary. It's also a complete evasion of the actual issue. But medieval families excel at not discussing things that might make everyone miserable, mainly because there are already plenty of things making everyone miserable without adding speculation about mysterious skin conditions. Your mother accepts this explanation with the grace of someone who's heard similar reassurances from family members who later turned out to be dying of various ailments, but understands that worrying about things you can't control is a luxury for people who have already solved all their controllable problems. Agnes coughs again, that deep, wet sound that's been getting progressively worse over the past few days. This morning it sounds different, rougher, more persistent. She tries to hide it by covering her mouth with her sleeve, but in a one-room cottage, secrets are about as private as shouting announcements from the church tower. Your father looks up from his porridge, his professional instincts activated by the sound. He's spent enough time around sick people to recognize the difference between a minor irritation and something that requires immediate attention, prayer, and possibly advanced planning for funeral arrangements. Agnes, he says, come here. She approaches reluctantly, the way children do when they suspect they're about to be subjected to adult attention they'd rather avoid. Your father places his hand on her forehead, checking for fever with the diagnostic technique that's been standard medical practice since humans first discovered that sick people feel different than healthy people. His expression changes, subtly, but you know him well enough to recognize the shift from routine parental concern to professional worry. Agnes is warm, too warm for a chilly November morning in an inadequately heated cottage. How long have you been coughing like this? he asks, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying not to alarm a child while simultaneously calculating whether the family medicine budget can accommodate whatever this might turn out to be. Since yesterday, Agnes admits, maybe the day before. It doesn't hurt much, just tickles. Medieval children are trained from birth to minimize their complaints, partly because resources for addressing problems are limited, and partly because complaining about discomfort in an era where discomfort is the baseline human condition is considered poor form. If something isn't actively preventing you from working, eating, or breathing, it's generally classified as a minor inconvenience rather than a medical emergency. But your father's expression suggests this might be more serious than a minor inconvenience. He examines Agnes more carefully, looking at her eyes, checking her throat, feeling along her neck for swollen lymph nodes, the lumps that appear when the body is fighting something it doesn't understand and isn't winning against. "Mother," he says quietly, "prepare a draught of honey and herbs, the strong ones." The strong herbs are kept in a separate pouch, reserved for serious illness and special occasions. They're expensive, bitter, and effective enough that using them represents a significant financial investment in someone's continued existence. When your father calls for the strong herbs, it means he's moved beyond hope and wishful thinking into the realm of actual medical intervention. Your mother begins preparing the mixture with the kind of focused attention that suggests she's also recognized the seriousness of the situation. Medieval families don't panic easily. They've seen too much death, disease, and disaster to waste energy on hysteria, but they respond quickly and decisively when circumstances require action. Meanwhile, the spot on your arm continues to burn and itch with increasing intensity. You try to ignore it, focusing on breakfast and the prospect of a day spent helping your father extract Willem's troublesome tooth, but ignoring a potential medical emergency while watching your sister develop symptoms of what might be a serious illness requires more self-control than you currently possess. You excuse yourself from the breakfast table, claiming you need to check on Brunhilde, the cow who's been producing even less milk than usual and might benefit from professional consultation or at least someone talking to her about her attitude problem. This gives you an opportunity to examine your arm more carefully in the pale morning light filtering through the doorway. The spot has definitely changed since you first noticed it. It's larger now, about the size of a walnut, and the dark center has begun to develop a slightly different texture, softer, like it's breaking down from the inside. The area around it is red and warm to the touch, and when you press on it gently, it hurts with the kind of deep, aching pain that suggests something important is going wrong in ways you don't understand. This is not a bruise. This is not an insect bite. This is something else. Something that's actively growing and changing and making itself at home in your body without your permission or participation. Your mind immediately jumps to the stories you've heard from traveling merchants and wandering priests, tales of strange illnesses that appear suddenly, spread quickly, and kill efficiently. Plagues that empty entire villages, leaving behind nothing but abandoned cottages and graves that no one's left alive to tend. Diseases that mark their victims with dark spots, painful swellings, and the kind of swift, merciless death that medieval people have learned to fear above all other possibilities. But surely not here. Not now. Not to you and your family who've done nothing worse than water down ale occasionally and maybe kept a few coins that should have gone to the church collection. Surely the mysterious illnesses that devastate other places are someone else's problem, something that happens to other people in other villages under other circumstances. Except that's exactly what everyone thinks right up until it happens to them. You find Brunhilde in her usual spot, standing in the small shed that serves as the family's livestock accommodation, chewing something that might be hay, and looking at you with the kind of judgment that suggests she knows you're developing a potentially fatal illness and finds your denial of the situation personally offensive. Brunhilde is old, cranky, and possessed of the kind of bovine wisdom that comes from years of observing human behavior and finding it consistently disappointing. She produces milk sporadically, eats continuously, and provides a steady stream of fertilizer that's more valuable than her dairy contributions, but less pleasant to collect. Good morning, Brunhilde. You say partly to maintain the pretense that you're here for livestock management purposes, and partly because talking to the cow is often more satisfying than talking to actual people. How are you feeling today? Brunhilde responds by shifting her weight, releasing gas with the casual confidence of someone who's never had to worry about social expectations, and continuing to chew whatever she's found to occupy her mouth. This is about as much conversation as you can reasonably expect from a cow, which makes her more reliable than most of the humans in your life. You examine your arm again in the better light available near the doorway. The spot is definitely worse, larger, darker, and accompanied by what looks like a network of thin, dark lines spreading outward like the roots of some malevolent plant. The lines are barely visible, but they're there tracing paths under your skin toward your shoulder and down toward your hand. This is very bad. This is the kind of bad that requires immediate action, professional consultation, and the kind of prayers usually reserved for deathbed situations. This is the kind of bad that could kill you and probably will unless you do something about it right now. But what medieval medicine operates on principles that are part science, part religion, part folk wisdom, and part desperation. Treatments range from genuinely helpful honey for wound care, willow bark for pain relief, to completely useless praying to specific saints while standing on one foot to actively harmful bloodletting to cure almost everything. Your father is a tooth puller, not a physician, but he's seen enough medical problems to recognize serious trouble when it appears. The village has a wise woman named Marguerite who knows herbs and healing, but her services cost money the family doesn't have, and her success rate with mysterious illnesses is roughly the same as prayer and wishful thinking. The nearest actual physician is in the market town, a day's walk away, assuming he's still alive, still practicing and still willing to treat patients who can't pay in advance. Medieval physicians are educated, trained, and expensive enough that consulting one represents a major financial investment with no guarantee of positive results. You could tell your family, but that would mean admitting you've been hiding a potentially serious medical condition, which might result in panic, expensive treatments, and the kind of family crisis that could devastate your already precarious financial situation. Medieval families operate on thin margins. One serious illness can push an entire household from modest survival into desperate poverty. Or you could continue pretending everything is fine, hoping the spot goes away on its own, and dealing with the consequences if and when they become impossible to ignore. This approach has the advantage of being free and requiring no immediate action, but the disadvantage of potentially allowing a serious condition to progress beyond the point where treatment might be effective. Medieval people face these kinds of impossible choices constantly. Decisions where every option carries significant risks, and costs where delay might mean death, but action might mean ruin. It's a world where individuals are forced to make medical decisions based on incomplete information, limited resources, and the knowledge that guessing wrong could have consequences that extend far beyond their own survival. You decide to compromise, as medieval people often do when faced with impossible situations. You'll monitor the condition carefully, try some basic home remedies, and tell your family if it gets significantly worse. This approach has the advantages of being cautious without being alarmist and giving you time to gather more information before committing to expensive medical interventions. But even as you make this decision, you know it's probably inadequate. The spot is growing, the lines under your skin are spreading, and your arm now throbs with a persistent ache that suggests whatever process has begun is accelerating. Time is not on your side, and medieval medicine operates on time frames that are measured in days and weeks, not hours and minutes. Brunhilde finishes whatever she was chewing and looks at you expectantly, waiting for hay grain, or at least some acknowledgement of her continued existence. You scratch her behind the ears, a gesture that she accepts with the kind of resigned tolerance, usually reserved for unwanted relatives, and promise her better feed as soon as the family's financial situation improves. Take care of yourself, Brunhilde, you say. And if anyone asks, you never saw me looking at mysterious spots on my arm and making worried faces. Brunhilde responds by turning away and beginning the search for something else to eat, which is as close to a promise of discretion as you're likely to get from livestock. You return to the cottage where your father is finishing his preparations for the day's dental work, and your mother is tending to Agnes, who's accepted her dose of medicinal herbs with the stoic resignation of someone who understands that unpleasant medicine is better than untreated illness. The herbal mixture smells like someone decided to improve the scent of rotting leaves by adding notes of bitter disappointment and desperate hope. Agnes makes faces as she drinks it, but she drinks it all because medieval children learn early that arguing with medicine is less productive than arguing with weather. How is she, you ask, trying to sound like someone whose primary concern is his sister's health, rather than someone who's desperately hoping her symptoms are different enough from his own that they represent separate problems requiring separate solutions? The fever's mild, your father says, and the cough sounds worse than it is. Probably just the changing weather and the dampness in the cottage. But we'll watch her carefully. Your mother nods her face, carrying the kind of controlled worry that medieval parents perfect through years of watching children navigate a world designed to kill them in creative and unexpected ways. Agnes looks pale but alert, which is better than pale and listless, and her appetite seems normal, which is always a good sign in an era where loss of appetite often signals the beginning of something much worse. Thomas, your father, continues gathering his tools into the leather satchel that serves as his mobile dental office. We should leave soon. Willem's father wants the work done early before the boy has time to think about it too much and change his mind. This is sound psychological strategy. Medieval dental procedures are traumatic enough when the patient is committed to enduring them. They become nearly impossible when the patient has had time to consider exactly what's going to happen and develop reasonable objections to the process. You nod, trying to project confidence and competence, while secretly wondering if you'll be able to concentrate on holding down a struggling young man while your own arm throbs with increasing intensity. The spot has begun to itch, as well as burn, and you find yourself fighting the urge to scratch it, which only makes the itching worse and adds a new layer of discomfort to an already complicated situation. The walk to Willem's cottage takes about 20 minutes, following paths that are less designed for human travel and more wherever people have walked often enough to beat down the vegetation. Medieval villages don't have urban planning, so much as organic growth cottages appear wherever someone can clear enough land and convince a lord to grant permission, connected by footpaths that follow the landscape's natural contours and the inhabitants' collective laziness. As you walk, your father provides professional instruction in the fine art of tooth extraction, a skill that requires equal parts medical knowledge, physical strength, and psychological manipulation. The key, he explains, adjusting his satchel to prevent the tools from clanking together too loudly, is confidence. If you act like you know what you're doing, the patient will believe you know what you're doing, even when you're not entirely sure yourself. Uncertainty is contagious. If you're nervous, they'll be terrified, and terrified patients don't hold still. This philosophy extends beyond dentistry to most aspects of medieval professional life. Competence is often less important than the appearance of competence, and the ability to project authority and confidence can compensate for significant gaps in actual knowledge or skill. Also, your father continues work quickly. Pain is inevitable, but prolonged pain is torture. Get the tooth out as fast as possible, even if it means being a bit rough. A quick injury heals faster than a slow one, and the patient will thank you for efficiency even while they're cursing your ancestry. Medieval medicine operates on the principle that since pain can't be eliminated, it should at least be minimized in duration. This leads to treatments that prioritize speed over gentleness, results over comfort, and survival over anything resembling a pleasant patient experience. As you walk, you become increasingly aware of your arm. The burning sensation has intensified, and the itching has developed an urgent quality that suggests your body is trying to communicate something important about the situation developing beneath your skin. You resist the urge to roll up your sleeve and examine the spot again, partly because you're afraid of what you might find, and partly because your father would notice and ask questions you're not prepared to answer. The morning air is crisp and clean, carrying the sense of wood smoke, damp earth, and the general mustiness that hangs over medieval settlements like a persistent reminder that hygiene is a luxury for people who've already solved all their survival problems. Frost covers the ground in areas where the sun hasn't yet reached, creating a crystalline landscape that would be beautiful if you weren't preoccupied with potential medical emergencies. Other villagers are beginning their daily routines. Women drawing water from wells, men driving livestock to whatever pasture is available, children running errands and trying to avoid the kind of work that builds character but destroys enthusiasm. Everyone nods politely as you pass, offering the kind of respectful greetings appropriate for the village tooth puller and his apprentice son. Medieval villages operate on complex social hierarchies where everyone knows everyone else's business profession and approximate level of respectability. Your father occupies a unique position, not quite a craftsman, not quite a physician, but definitely someone with specialized skills that people need occasionally and fear constantly. Willem's cottage is larger than yours, indicating that his family has achieved a level of prosperity that allows for luxuries like separate sleeping areas and furniture that serves specific purposes rather than just filling available space. His father, Edmund, is a successful farmer who owns his own land and employs several workers during harvest season, which makes him wealthy enough to afford professional dental care and poor enough to consider it a significant expense. Edmund greets you at the door with the kind of strained courtesy that people use when they're about to pay someone to hurt their child for their child's own good. Willem stands behind him looking like someone who's been condemned to death, but is trying to maintain his dignity during the final proceedings. "Good morning, Master Thomas," Edmund says to your father, using the honorific that acknowledges professional expertise while remaining appropriately deferential. Willem is ready for you, though I think ready might be overstating his enthusiasm for the procedure. Willem, who appears to be about 16 and possesses the kind of robust health that makes dental problems seem like cosmic injustice, manages a weak smile that demonstrates exactly why he needs professional intervention. One of his molars has developed the kind of spectacular decay that transforms a simple tooth into a source of constant agony, and the side of his face is slightly swollen from the infection that's taken up residence in his jaw. Medieval dental problems don't develop gradually. They appear suddenly, progress rapidly, and demand immediate attention before they kill you. Willem's tooth has reached the stage where extraction is the only option, assuming he wants to continue living without constant pain and the risk of sepsis spreading throughout his body. Let's have a look, your father says, producing a small metal mirror that allows him to examine the patient's mouth without actually putting his fingers into areas where desperate people might bite. Medieval dental examinations require the kind of caution usually reserved for handling dangerous animals or unstable explosives. Willem opens his mouth reluctantly, revealing the kind of dental disaster that would make modern people faint and medieval people reach for strong drink. The infected tooth is black with decay, surrounded by swollen, angry gums, and accompanied by several other teeth that look like they're planning their own rebellions against oral health. Yes, your father says with the calm authority of someone who's seen worse and survived the experience that needs to come out immediately. The infection is spreading and delay could be fatal. This is not hyperbole. Medieval dental infections kill people regularly, spreading from the mouth to the brain or throughout the bloodstream with the kind of efficiency that makes minor dental problems into major medical emergencies. Willem's tooth represents a clear and present danger to his continued existence. How long will it take? Willem asks, his voice carrying the kind of desperate hope that suggests he's expecting reassurance that will make the upcoming ordeal seem manageable. Not long, your father replies, which is technically true, but misleading in the way that not long can describe both a brief moment and an eternity depending on your perspective and pain tolerance. The important thing is to hold still and trust the process. Medieval medical procedures require active patient participation in ways that modern medicine has eliminated through the generous application of anesthesia and pharmaceutical pain management. Willem will need to remain conscious, cooperative, and reasonably still while someone removes part of his anatomy with metal tools and brute force. You help your father arrange his equipment on a wooden table that Edmund has cleared for the purpose. The tools look exactly like what they are, medieval implements designed to grip, twist, and extract things that don't want to be removed. They're clean, sharp, and possessed of the kind of utilitarian beauty that comes from centuries of refinement in the service of human suffering. Thomas, your father says you'll need to hold Willem's head steady while I work. Position yourself behind him, grip his shoulders firmly, and don't let go no matter what happens. Patients have a tendency to move suddenly when they're in pain, and sudden movement during dental extraction can turn a simple procedure into a major catastrophe. You take your position, trying to ignore the increasing discomfort in your arm and focus on the professional responsibilities of dental assistance. Willem sits in a wooden chair that's been positioned to give your father the best possible angle of approach, and you place your hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension in his muscles as he prepares for what's coming. Willem, your father says, producing a small bottle of something that might charitably be called medicine, and more accurately described as liquid courage. Drink this, all of it, quickly. Willem accepts the bottle with the resignation of someone who understands that whatever's in it can't possibly be worse than an infected tooth, and drains it in 3 large swallows. His face immediately reflects the conclusion that he may have been wrong about what could be worse than an infected tooth, but the alcohol begins working almost immediately, providing the kind of pain relief that medieval medicine relies on because it's effective, available, and requires no specialized knowledge to administer. Now your father continues, selecting a pair of pliers that look like they were designed by someone who'd heard about teeth but never actually seen any. This will hurt, but only briefly. The pain will stop as soon as the tooth is out. This is both true and completely inadequate preparation for what's about to happen. Medieval pain is different from modern pain, sharper, more immediate, and unfiltered by the pharmaceutical innovations that allow contemporary people to experience discomfort without the existential terror that accompanies unmanageable agony. Your father positions the pliers carefully, finding the best grip on the infected tooth while avoiding the surrounding tissue as much as possible. Medieval dental extraction is part surgery, part demolition, and part prayer, requiring the practitioner to remove the problem quickly and efficiently while causing as little additional damage as possible. Hold steady, Thomas, he says, and begins to apply pressure. What happens next is exactly what you would expect from medieval dentistry, but worse. Willem's entire body goes rigid as the pliers grip his tooth. His hands clench the arms of the chair hard enough to leave permanent impressions in the wood, and he makes the kind of sound that suggests his soul is trying to escape through his mouth. You hold his shoulders as firmly as possible, feeling his muscles strain against your grip, while your father works with the kind of focused determination that comes from years of practice and the knowledge that hesitation only prolongs suffering. The infected tooth resists removal with the stubborn tenacity that comes from being deeply rooted in bone and surrounded by inflamed tissue. But your arm, which has been aching steadily all morning, chooses this moment to develop a new symptom. A sharp, stabbing pain shoots from the dark spot up toward your shoulder, intense enough to make you gasp and loosen your grip on Willem's shoulders, just as your father applies maximum pressure to extract the tooth. Willem, feeling your grip weaken, jerks forward instinctively, and your father, committed to the extraction, follows through with the motion. There's a wet, tearing sound, followed by a moment of absolute silence, followed by Willem making noises that suggest he's discovered new and creative ways to express pain. Got it, your father says, holding up the extracted tooth like a trophy. It's larger than expected roots and all black with decay, and accompanied by more blood than seems reasonable for something that small. Willem slumps in the chair, breathing heavily, and looking like someone who's just survived something that might generously be called a medical procedure. But the extraction was successful. The infected tooth is out, the immediate danger is over, and Willem will heal properly. Assuming the wound doesn't become infected, he doesn't develop complications, and medieval medicine doesn't find new ways to turn a simple dental procedure into a life-threatening emergency. Well done, Edmund says, producing 2 silver coins and handing them to your father with the relief of someone whose son has survived professional medical attention. Willem will be better within days, and the pain will stop as soon as the initial trauma heals. Your father accepts the payment with the satisfaction of someone who's provided a genuinely useful service and been compensated appropriately for the skill, risk, and professional knowledge required. Medieval dentistry may be primitive by modern standards, but it's effective in the ability to relieve pain and prevent death from dental infections, represents a valuable contribution to community health and individual survival. But as you help clean the blood from Willem's mouth and pack the extraction site with herbs to prevent infection, your arm throbs with increasing intensity. The spot has begun to itch with the kind of urgent insistence that suggests your body is trying to warn you about something important, and the dark lines spreading under your skin seem to have grown longer and more distinct. This is becoming impossible to ignore. Whatever's happening to your arm is progressing rapidly, and the symptoms are developing in ways that suggest serious medical intervention may be required sooner rather than later. Medieval illnesses don't wait for convenient timing or adequate financial resources. They progress according to their own logic and timeline, regardless of the patient's preferences or circumstances. By the time you and your father return home, your arm feels like it's been set on fire from the inside. The burning sensation has spread from the original spot up toward your shoulder and down toward your wrist, following those dark lines that are now clearly visible beneath your skin like some malevolent map of your circulatory system. You can't hide it anymore. The pain is affecting your ability to concentrate, work, and maintain the pretense that everything is normal. During Willem's tooth extraction, your grip had weakened at a critical moment, and while the procedure was ultimately successful, your father noticed your lapse in attention with the kind of professional concern that suggests he's beginning to suspect something is wrong. Thomas, he says, as you enter the cottage where your mother is tending to Agnes and the fire crackles with the steady reliability that keeps medieval families alive through winter months. You seem distracted this morning. Is everything well with you? Medieval fathers don't ask about feelings or emotional states. They ask about practical matters that might affect work, family obligations, and the general functioning of households that operate on thin margins where individual problems can quickly become collective disasters. You realize this is the moment when pretending becomes impossible and potentially dangerous. Whatever's happening to your arm is serious enough to interfere with your ability to assist in dental procedures, which means it's serious enough to threaten the family's income and professional reputation. Medieval families can't afford to have productive members suddenly become unable to work, especially when their work requires physical strength and reliable coordination. Father, you say, rolling up your sleeve to reveal the dark spot and the network of lines spreading outward from it like the roots of some underground infection. I think I need to see a physician. The cottage falls silent. Medieval families understand the significance of statements like, I need to see a physician, in the same way that modern families understand statements like, I need to see a specialist, or we need to discuss surgery. It means that home remedies, hope, and prayer have been exhausted, and professional medical intervention with all its attendant costs, risks, and uncertainties has become necessary. Your father examines your arm with the careful attention of someone who's seen enough medical problems to recognize serious trouble when it appears. His expression changes as he traces the dark lines with his finger, feeling the heat radiating from the infected area and noting the way the spot has grown and changed since morning. Mother, he says quietly, prepare a poultice with the strongest herbs we have, and send word to Marguerite that we may need her consultation this evening. Marguerite is the village wise woman, an elderly widow who knows more about healing herbs, medical lore, and the practical treatment of common ailments than anyone else within a day's walk. She's not a trained physician. Medieval villages rarely have access to university-educated doctors, but her knowledge comes from decades of treating sick people with whatever remedies are available, effective, and affordable. Your mother begins preparing the poultice with the kind of focused efficiency that medieval women develop through years of managing medical emergencies with limited resources. The herbs she selects are the expensive ones, reserved for serious conditions: yarrow for bleeding, comfrey for tissue, healing garlic for infection, and willow bark for pain relief. Medieval herbal medicine is a complex blend of genuine pharmacological knowledge, folk wisdom passed down through generations, and desperate experimentation with whatever plant materials might possibly help. Some treatments work remarkably well. Willow bark contains the same active ingredient as aspirin. Honey has genuine antibacterial properties, and many traditional herbs have been validated by modern pharmaceutical research. Others are completely useless or actively harmful based on theories that seem logical to people who don't understand germ theory circulation or the actual mechanisms of disease and healing. Medieval medical practice is essentially educated guesswork, informed by centuries of trial and error with an emphasis on the error. But in a world where professional medical care is expensive, distant, and often ineffective, herbal remedies represent the best available treatment for most people most of the time. They're affordable, accessible, and occasionally helpful, which makes them infinitely better than no treatment at all. Agnes, who's been quietly suffering through her own illness, looks up from her bowl of medicinal herbs with the kind of concern that children show when they realize family problems are more serious than adults have been letting on. Medieval children develop sophisticated understanding of crisis management through exposure to the constant low-level emergencies that characterize daily life in an era where survival is never guaranteed. Is Thomas going to die? She asks, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact curiosity that children use to address topics that adults find too frightening to discuss directly. No one is going to die, your mother says firmly, applying the herbal poultice to your arm with the kind of gentle competence that comes from years of treating injuries, illnesses, and the various disasters that befall medieval families. Thomas has an infection that needs proper treatment, and we're going to provide it. This is the kind of confident reassurance that medieval parents offer their children during medical crises, not because they're certain of positive outcomes, but because uncertainty and panic serve no useful purpose and tend to make difficult situations worse. Medieval families face medical emergencies with the same stoic pragmatism they apply to crop failures, harsh winters, and tax collections acknowledge the problem. Take whatever action is possible and accept that some things are beyond human control. The poultice feels cool against your burning skin, providing immediate relief from the constant pain that's been building throughout the morning. The herbs smell sharp and medicinal, like someone decided to concentrate the essence of healing into a paste that can be applied directly to whatever hurts. But even as the poultice begins to work, you can feel that the infection is still active, still spreading, still consuming whatever it feeds on beneath your skin. The pain subsides to a manageable level, but the burning sensation continues, and the dark lines seem to pulse with their own rhythm, like some alien heartbeat establishing itself in your arm. We should send for Brother Marcus, your father says, referring to the traveling monk who serves as the region's closest approximation to a trained physician. Brother Marcus studied at a monastery that maintained one of the few medical libraries in the area, and his knowledge of healing combines religious training with whatever medical texts survived the collapse of classical learning. Medieval medicine is divided among several types of practitioners: wise women like Marguerite, who rely on herbal knowledge and practical experience; barber-surgeons like your father, who handle dental work, wound treatment, and minor surgical procedures; traveling monks who combine religious healing with whatever medical training their monasteries provide; and university-trained physicians who are expensive, rare, and often more concerned with theoretical knowledge than practical treatment. Brother Marcus represents the middle ground, more educated than local healers, but more accessible than university physicians, with enough medical knowledge to recognize serious conditions and enough practical experience to attempt treatments that might actually work. Brother Marcus is in the next village treating the miller's wife, your mother says, demonstrating the kind of detailed knowledge of local medical emergencies that medieval communities maintain through networks of informal communication. But he should return by tomorrow evening, assuming her condition doesn't require extended care. This means waiting at least another day before professional medical consultation becomes available, during which time your condition will either improve under herbal treatment or progress to whatever stage represents the next level of medical emergency. Medieval healthcare operates on time frames that modern people would find unacceptably slow, but medieval people understand that immediate medical attention is a luxury for the wealthy and well-connected. What about the physician in Market Town, you ask, referring to Master Geoffrey, the university-trained doctor who maintains a practice in the larger settlement a day's walk away. Master Geoffrey studied at the medical school in Montpellier, one of the most prestigious institutions in Europe, and possesses the kind of theoretical knowledge that medieval people regard with a mixture of respect and suspicion. Your father considers this option with the careful calculation that medieval families apply to any expense that might prevent financial disaster, but could also cause it. Master Geoffrey charges fees that reflect his education, training, and professional status. Silver coins, rather than copper payment in advance, rather than after successful treatment and additional costs for medicines, procedures, and the kind of complex interventions that university-trained physicians consider appropriate to their expertise. If Brother Marcus can't help your father says we'll consider Master Jeffrey, but his fees could cost us more than the cottage is worth, and university physicians sometimes provide treatments that are more expensive than they are effective. This reflects the medieval understanding that medical education doesn't necessarily correlate with medical effectiveness, and that theoretical knowledge can sometimes interfere with practical treatment. University physicians learn from classical texts that emphasize humoral theory, astrological influences, and complex philosophical explanations for disease, while practical healers focus on treatments that work regardless of why they work. Medieval patients often receive better care from experienced folk healers than from university-trained physicians, partly because folk medicine emphasizes empirical observation over theoretical consistency, and partly because folk healers can't afford to lose patients the way that prestigious physicians can. But your condition is progressing in ways that suggest folk remedies may be inadequate. The dark lines under your skin have continued to spread despite the herbal poultice, and you're beginning to experience systemic symptoms, mild fever, general malaise, and the kind of fatigue that suggests your body is diverting energy from normal activities to fight whatever invasion has established itself in your arm. Medieval people understand the difference between minor ailments that resolve with time and rest and serious conditions that require immediate intervention from whatever medical resources are available. Your family recognizes that your symptoms fall into the second category, which means that cost, convenience, and personal preferences become secondary to the urgent need for effective treatment. I'll walk to Market Town today, you decide, partly because waiting for Brother Marcus seems increasingly unwise, and partly because taking action feels better than passive acceptance of whatever might happen if the infection continues to spread. Not alone, your father says immediately. Medieval travel is dangerous under the best circumstances: bandits, wild animals, harsh weather, and the simple possibility of getting lost or injured far from help and traveling while sick adds additional risks that no sensible person accepts voluntarily. I'll come with you, he continues. We'll leave immediately, reach the town by evening, and see Master Jeffrey first thing tomorrow morning. The sooner we address this, the better our chances of successful treatment. Your mother begins preparing for the trip with the kind of organized efficiency that medieval women apply to family emergencies. Food for the journey, extra clothing for unexpected weather, coins for physician fees and medicines, and written instructions for Agnes's continued care in case the trip takes longer than expected. Medieval travel preparations require careful planning because the margin for error is small, and the consequences of inadequate preparation can be fatal. Weather can change quickly. Roads can become impassable, and travelers need to be self-sufficient for the duration of their journey, plus whatever additional time unexpected circumstances might require. Marguerite arrives while these preparations are underway, summoned by the kind of informal communication network that allows medieval villages to coordinate resources and share information without formal organizational systems. She's a small, weathered woman in her 60s who moves with the careful efficiency of someone who's treated enough medical emergencies to recognize serious conditions immediately. She examines your arm with the professional competence that comes from decades of practical experience, tracing the dark lines with her finger and noting the heat, swelling, and discoloration that indicate active infection. Her expression remains carefully neutral, but you notice the slight tightening around her eyes that suggests professional concern. This needs immediate attention, she says, confirming what your family already suspected. The infection is spreading rapidly, and herbal treatment alone may not be sufficient. You're right to seek physician consultation, and you should go immediately. Medieval wise women understand the limits of folk medicine and don't hesitate to recommend professional medical care when conditions exceed their knowledge or resources. Marguerite has seen enough serious infections to recognize when herbal remedies need to be supplemented by whatever additional treatments university-trained physicians can provide. In the meantime, she continues preparing a different poultice with herbs that smell even stronger and more medicinal than your mother's preparation. This should slow the infection's progress and provide some pain relief. But don't delay the journey. Conditions like this can progress from serious to fatal very quickly. The new poultice contains ingredients that you don't recognize, herbs that smell bitter and sharp and somehow more serious than the common remedies used for routine ailments. Medieval wise women maintain collections of rare and powerful plants that they reserve for life-threatening conditions, medicines that are too dangerous for casual use, but necessary when ordinary treatments prove inadequate. She also provides a small vial of liquid that looks like concentrated darkness and smells like it was extracted from something that died badly. Drink this if the pain becomes unbearable, she instructs. Not before it's strong enough to be dangerous if you're not actually dying. But if the infection reaches your heart or brain, it might buy you enough time to reach proper medical care. Medieval pain management operates on the principle that suffering is inevitable but doesn't have to be unlimited. Strong medicines exist for extreme circumstances, but they're dangerous enough that using them requires careful judgment about whether the benefits outweigh the risks. You accept the vial with the understanding that it represents a last resort, something to be used only when the alternative is certain death. Medieval people live with the constant awareness that medical emergencies can escalate quickly beyond the point where any treatment becomes effective, and desperate remedies exist for desperate circumstances. Agnes coughs again, that deep, wet sound that's been getting worse throughout the day, and Marguerite's attention immediately shifts to her. Medieval healers learned to assess multiple patients simultaneously, prioritizing treatment based on the urgency of symptoms and the likelihood of successful intervention. "How long has she been coughing like this?" Marguerite asks, placing her hand on Agnes's forehead to check for fever. 3 days, your mother replies. "It started as a minor irritation but has been getting worse. She's warm but not burning with fever, and her appetite is still good." Marguerite listens to Agnes's breathing, examines her throat, and feels along her neck for swollen lymph nodes. Medieval diagnostic techniques rely on observation, palpation, and the kind of clinical intuition that develops through years of treating sick people with limited technological resources. Lung fever she diagnoses using the medieval term for what modern medicine would call pneumonia. Still in the early stages but progressing, she needs rest, warmth, and herbal treatment to prevent it from becoming life-threatening. Medieval pneumonia kills people regularly, especially during winter months when cold, damp conditions stress the respiratory system and make recovery difficult. Agnes's condition isn't immediately dangerous, but it requires careful monitoring and treatment to prevent progression to the kind of severe illness that proves fatal despite all available medical intervention. Continue the herbal drafts. Marguerite instructs preparing another mixture of medicines that smell like concentrated winter. Keep her warm, encourage her to rest, and watch for signs that the infection is spreading. If she develops high fever, difficulty breathing, or chest pain, send for me immediately. Medieval families often manage multiple medical emergencies, simultaneously balancing resources and attention among several sick family members while maintaining whatever normal activities remain necessary for survival. Your mother will need to care for Agnes while you and your father travel to seek medical treatment, dividing her attention between immediate nursing duties and the household management that keeps the family functioning. The boy's condition is more urgent. Marguerite tells your parents, referring to your infection with the clinical directness that medieval people use to discuss medical emergencies. The girl will likely recover with proper care, but his infection could kill him within days if it's not treated aggressively. This assessment reflects the medieval understanding that medical resources should be allocated based on the urgency of conditions and the likelihood of successful treatment. Agnes's pneumonia is serious but responds well to herbal remedies and nursing care, while your infection requires specialized treatment that's only available from university-trained physicians. You and your father finish preparations for the journey, while Marguerite provides final instructions for Agnes's care and additional herbal remedies for your infection. The trip to Market Town will take most of the day, assuming good weather and no unexpected delays, and you'll need to carry enough supplies to support yourselves until Master Geoffrey can provide treatment and you're well enough to travel home. Medieval journeys are always uncertain undertakings, subject to weather, road conditions, and the various hazards that make travel dangerous for people who can't afford armed escorts, or the kind of transportation that provides protection from bandits, wild animals, and simple accidents that become life-threatening when they occur far from help. But your condition is progressing rapidly enough that delay seems more dangerous than travel, and Master Geoffrey represents the best available medical care within reasonable distance. Medieval people often face choices between accepting known risks and unknown ones, and traveling while sick seems preferable to staying home while a potentially fatal infection spreads unchecked. As you prepare to leave, Agnes calls out from her bed, her voice hoarse from coughing, but still carrying the kind of determined affection that characterizes relationships between medieval siblings who understand that life is fragile and family members may not always be available to express their feelings. "Thomas," she says, "come back healthy. I need someone to complain about my coughing." Medieval children develop sophisticated understanding of mortality and medical risk through exposure to the constant stream of illness, injury, and death that characterizes daily life in an era where survival is never guaranteed. Agnes knows that your journey represents a serious medical emergency, and her request reflects both genuine concern and the kind of practical acceptance that allows medieval families to function despite constant uncertainty. You promise to return healthy, which is the kind of optimistic commitment that medieval people make, despite understanding that outcomes are often beyond human control. Medieval medicine can treat many conditions successfully, but it can also fail spectacularly, and every medical journey represents a gamble with stakes that include not just recovery or continued illness, but life or death. Your father shoulders his traveling pack, which contains coins for physician fees, food for the journey, extra clothing for unexpected weather, and the tools of his dental trade in case emergency income becomes necessary. Medieval travel requires self-sufficiency and the ability to generate resources when unexpected circumstances require extended stays or additional expenses. As you walk away from the cottage, your arm throbbing with each step, you look back to see your mother standing in the doorway with Agnes beside her, both of them watching your departure with the kind of careful composure that medieval families maintain during medical crises. They understand that this may be the last time they see you healthy, or possibly the last time they see you at all. Medieval farewells carry emotional weight that modern people rarely experience because medieval people understand that routine separations can become permanent without warning. Disease, accident, violence, and simple misfortune can transform ordinary journeys into final partings, and every goodbye includes the possibility that it might actually be goodbye. The road to Market Town follows paths that are less engineered transportation infrastructure and more whatever route people have used often enough to wear down the vegetation. Medieval roads exist where they're needed, maintained by the people who use them, and subject to seasonal changes that can make familiar routes impassable without warning. Your father sets a steady pace that balances the need for speed with the reality that you're traveling while sick, and may not have the stamina for forced marches. Medieval travel requires careful management of energy resources and time, especially when one of the travelers is dealing with a medical condition that affects strength, endurance, and general physical capabilities. As you walk, the infection in your arm continues its relentless progress. The dark lines have spread further up your shoulder and down toward your hand, and you're beginning to experience systemic symptoms that suggest the condition is affecting your entire body, rather than remaining localized to the original site. Medieval infections don't respect boundaries or negotiate with their hosts. They spread according to their own biological logic, following blood vessels, lymphatic channels, and whatever pathways provide the least resistance to their advance. Your body is fighting back, but the battle is being fought on terrain that heavily favors the invading organisms. The journey ahead represents your best chance for effective treatment, but it also represents a race against time, with your infection advancing steadily while you and your father hurry toward medical care that may or may not prove adequate to address whatever process has established itself in your arm. Medieval medicine can work miracles when conditions are right and treatment is applied promptly, but it can also fail completely when infections progress beyond the point where even the most skilled physicians can intervene effectively. Your journey to Master Jeffrey will determine which outcome awaits you, and the clock is ticking with the relentless rhythm of medieval mortality. The market town of Millhaven appears before you, just as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would be beautiful if you weren't focusing most of your attention on the growing network of dark lines spreading up your arm like some malevolent vine taking root in your circulatory system. The journey has taken longer than expected, partly because your father insisted on a careful pace to accommodate your condition, and partly because medieval roads have their own opinions about efficient travel that rarely align with human preferences for direct routes. You've walked through forests where ancient trees lean over paths like concerned grandparents, across streams that require careful negotiation with stepping stones that may or may not support human weight, and along ridges that provide spectacular views of countryside that's simultaneously beautiful and completely indifferent to your medical emergency. Your arm now throbs with a rhythm that seems synchronized with your heartbeat, and the infection has begun to affect your general health in ways that suggest whatever process began with a small dark spot is evolving into something significantly more serious. You're running a low fever, your appetite has disappeared entirely, and you're experiencing the kind of bone-deep fatigue that makes simple activities like walking feel like major undertakings. Medieval infections don't follow polite schedules or convenient timelines. They progress according to their own biological imperatives, consuming whatever resources they can access while spreading through whatever pathways offer the least resistance. Your body is fighting back with the immune responses that medieval people understand as fever weakness, and the body's attempt to burn out whatever evil has taken residence within it, but the battle is being fought on terrain that increasingly favors the invading organisms. Millhaven is what passes for urban sophistication in this part of medieval England, a settlement large enough to support specialized craftsmen, multiple churches, a weekly market, and the kind of amenities that villages can't afford. The town exists because it sits at the intersection of two trade routes, provides services for the surrounding agricultural region, and has managed to avoid being burned down by raiders' plague or political upheaval long enough to develop the infrastructure that makes civilized life possible. The town walls are impressive for a settlement that doesn't aspire to military importance, stone fortifications tall enough to discourage casual raiders, but not substantial enough to withstand serious siege warfare. Medieval towns exist in constant tension between the need for security and the practical limitations of defensive architecture, and Millhaven represents a reasonable compromise between protection and accessibility. Guards at the town gate examine you and your father with the professional suspicion that medieval authorities apply to all travelers, especially those who arrive near evening and look like they might be carrying diseases, debts, or other problems that could become the town's responsibility. Medieval communities are simultaneously hospitable to legitimate travelers and deeply suspicious of anyone whose presence might strain local resources or introduce complications that the community can't afford to address. Your father presents the small wooden token that identifies him as a recognized craftsman traveling on legitimate business, a carved symbol that indicates his profession, his village of origin, and his general respectability, according to the complex medieval systems that determine who belongs where and why. Medieval travel requires documentation that proves you're not a criminal, a vagrant, or someone fleeing debts, diseases, or other obligations that might make your presence problematic for your hosts. Tooth puller from Little Wickham. The guard reads from the token, traveling with his son to consult Master Geoffrey regarding a medical emergency. Business is legitimate. Travelers are sponsored by their village headman, and fees for emergency medical consultation have been arranged in advance. This last point is crucial. Medieval towns don't allow people to enter seeking expensive professional services unless they can demonstrate ability to pay, because physicians, like other skilled craftsmen, require advance payment for complex or risky procedures. Your father has brought enough silver to cover Master Geoffrey's consultation fees, but emergency medical treatment can escalate quickly beyond the resources of ordinary families. The guards allow you to enter, directing you toward the section of town where Master Geoffrey maintains his practice and residence. Medieval physicians occupy unique positions in urban society, respected for their education and skills, wealthy enough to afford substantial houses and sophisticated amenities, but also somewhat isolated by their specialized knowledge and the fact that most of their interactions with ordinary people involve pain, expense, and medical procedures that patients endure rather than enjoy. Master Geoffrey's house is immediately recognizable as the residence of someone who's achieved significant professional success. 2 stories of well-maintained stone construction with glass windows that demonstrate both wealth and access to luxury goods, a slate roof that suggests permanent prosperity rather than seasonal survival, and the kind of architectural details that indicate the owner can afford to care about aesthetics as well as functionality. Medieval physicians live well when they live well at all. Their services are expensive because their education is expensive, their knowledge is rare, and their ability to provide effective treatment can literally save lives. Master Geoffrey represents the pinnacle of medieval medical achievement, a university-trained professional whose theoretical knowledge is supplemented by years of practical experience treating conditions that challenge the limits of contemporary medical understanding. A servant answers your father's knock, a young man dressed in clothes that are clean, well-fitted, and made from materials that suggest regular wages and employment security. Medieval physicians employ household staff partly as symbols of their professional status and partly because managing a medical practice requires administrative support that allows the physician to focus on diagnosis and treatment rather than mundane business concerns. We seek consultation with Master Geoffrey regarding a medical emergency. Your father explains, producing the coins that demonstrate your family's ability to pay for professional services. My son has developed an infection that appears to be spreading rapidly, and local healers have recommended immediate physician consultation. The servant examines the coins with the practiced eye of someone who's learned to assess payment capability before promising access to expensive professional services. Medieval physicians can't afford to provide charity care for every medical emergency, and their household staff serve as the first line of financial screening that ensures only patients who can pay actually receive treatment. Master Jeffrey is available for emergency consultation. The servant confirms, but his fees for urgent cases reflect the additional time and attention required for conditions that can't wait for regular appointment schedules. The consultation fee is 4 silver pieces payable in advance, with additional charges for medicines, procedures, and follow-up care as required. 4 silver pieces represents a substantial portion of your family's annual income, more than your father typically earns in several months of dental work, enough to purchase a milk cow or pay rent on good farmland for an entire season. Medieval medical care is expensive because trained physicians are rare. Their education requires years of study at costly institutions, and their expertise commands premium prices from patients who desperately need services that no one else can provide. Your father pays without hesitation because your condition has progressed beyond the point where cost considerations matter more than immediate treatment. Medieval families face these kinds of impossible financial choices regularly. Decisions where delay might mean death, but payment might mean poverty. Where saving a family member's life requires risking the family's economic survival. Master Jeffrey will see you immediately, the servant says, leading you through the house toward what is obviously a professional consultation area. The interior demonstrates the kind of medieval luxury that educated professionals can afford: tapestries on the walls, carved wooden furniture that serves specific purposes rather than just filling space, and the warm, steady light that comes from multiple oil lamps rather than the single candles that most families reserve for special occasions. Medieval physicians' houses reflect their unique position in society. They're wealthy enough to afford genuine comfort, but scholarly enough to prioritize books, instruments, and the intellectual amenities that support professional practice. Master Jeffrey's home contains more books than most villages possess, collectively medical instruments that represent centuries of technological development and the kind of organized space that allows complex medical procedures to be performed safely and efficiently. Master Jeffrey himself appears to be in his 50s, with the kind of dignified bearing that comes from years of professional success and academic achievement. He's dressed in robes that indicate his university education, fine wool dyed in colors that demonstrate both wealth and scholarly status, with symbols embroidered along the edges that identify his medical training and professional affiliations. Medieval physicians cultivate an appearance that projects competence, education, and the kind of serious authority that patients need to trust when they're submitting to medical procedures that are painful, expensive, and uncertain in their outcomes. Master Jeffrey looks like someone who spent decades studying human anatomy, disease processes, and the complex theoretical frameworks that medieval medicine uses to understand illness and healing. "I understand you have an infection that's spreading rapidly," he says, gesturing for you to sit on a wooden examination table that's been positioned to take advantage of the light from several oil lamps. "Show me the affected area and describe how the condition developed." You roll up your sleeve, revealing the dark spot that's now grown to the size of a small apple, surrounded by an angry network of lines that trace pathways up your arm toward your shoulder and down toward your hand. The infection site looks worse than it did this morning, darker, more swollen, and accompanied by a smell that suggests tissue breakdown and bacterial activity. Master Jeffrey examines your arm with the kind of careful attention that comes from years of medical training and practical experience. He touches the infected area gently, feeling for heat, swelling, and changes in tissue texture that indicate the severity and progression of the infection. His examination is thorough, systematic, and conducted with the professional competence that justifies his expensive fees. "How long has this been developing?" he asks, tracing the dark lines with his finger while noting their extent and direction. "It appeared yesterday morning as a small spot," you explain. "By evening it had grown larger and the lines began appearing today. The pain has been getting worse and I'm beginning to feel ill in general fever, fatigue, loss of appetite." Medieval diagnostic interviews rely on careful questioning because physicians don't have access to laboratory tests, imaging studies, or other technological tools that modern medicine uses to identify disease processes. Master Jeffrey must base his diagnosis on visual examination, palpation, patient history, and whatever clues the infection provides about its nature and progression. "Have you been exposed to any unusual substances, animal bites, or contaminated materials recently?" He continues working through the systematic questioning that medieval physicians use to identify potential causes of mysterious illnesses. You describe your routine activities, helping with dental procedures, caring for livestock, working around the cottage and village, searching for anything that might explain how and where you acquired whatever organism has taken up residence in your arm. Medieval life involves constant exposure to bacteria, parasites, and other infectious agents, making it difficult to identify specific sources of contamination. Master Jeffrey listens carefully, asking follow-up questions about symptoms, timeline, and possible exposure sources. Medieval physicians understand that accurate diagnosis requires careful attention to details that might seem insignificant but could provide crucial information about disease processes and appropriate treatments. This appears to be what we call black corruption of the flesh. He diagnoses using medical terminology that sounds appropriately serious and scholarly. The dark lines indicate that the infection is spreading through your blood vessels, and the systemic symptoms suggest that the corruption is beginning to affect your entire body. Medieval medical terminology reflects the era's understanding of disease processes. Infections are corruptions, fevers are hot distempers, and pain is evidence of imbalanced humors that require correction through various therapeutic interventions. Master Jeffrey's diagnosis is both accurate in its recognition of serious bacterial infection and limited by the theoretical frameworks available to medieval medicine. The condition is serious. He continues, but treatable if we act immediately. The infection hasn't yet reached your heart or brain, which means we have time to implement aggressive treatment before it becomes life-threatening. Medieval physicians learned to balance honest assessment of medical risks with the kind of measured optimism that encourages patients to accept expensive, painful treatments that might prove effective. Master Jeffrey's prognosis reflects both the genuine danger you're facing and his professional confidence in the treatments he's prepared to provide. "What kind of treatment?" your father asks, speaking with the careful authority of someone who's paid substantial fees and expects detailed explanation of whatever medical procedures those fees will purchase. Master Jeffrey begins describing a treatment regimen that combines the best theoretical knowledge of medieval medicine with practical techniques that have proven effective in similar cases. His approach reflects both university training and years of clinical experience treating infections that challenge the limits of contemporary medical understanding. First, we must stop the infection's spread through bloodletting. He explains, producing a collection of brass bowls, sharp knives, and what appear to be small glass cups. The corrupted blood must be drained from the affected area to prevent it from carrying the infection throughout your body. Medieval bloodletting operates on humoral theory, the belief that disease results from imbalances among the four bodily humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and that removing excess or corrupted blood can restore healthy balance. While the theoretical basis is incorrect by modern standards, bloodletting can sometimes help with certain types of infection by reducing bacterial load and improving circulation. Next, we'll apply hot iron to the infection site to burn out the corruption. He continues indicating metal instruments that are heating over a small brazier. The heat will destroy whatever evil has taken residence in your flesh and create conditions that favor healing rather than continued infection. Cauterization with hot metal is actually effective against certain types of bacterial infection, killing organisms that can't survive high temperatures and creating an environment that inhibits further bacterial growth. Medieval physicians use cauterization regularly for wound treatment, infection control, and surgical procedures that require immediate hemostasis. Finally, we'll treat the wound with medicines that promote healthy tissue growth and prevent reinfection. He concludes showing you a collection of bottles and containers that contain various powders, oils, and preparations that smell medicinal and expensive. Medieval pharmaceutical preparations combine genuinely effective substances, honey for antibacterial action, herbs with anti-inflammatory properties, minerals that promote healing, with ingredients that are useless or harmful but traditional in medical practice. Master Jeffrey's medicines represent the best available treatments according to contemporary medical knowledge. The entire procedure will take several hours, he warns, and will be quite painful. But the alternative is allowing the infection to spread until it kills you, which will also be painful but less productive. Medieval medical procedures require patient cooperation and tolerance for pain levels that modern people can't imagine. Master Jeffrey's treatment will hurt significantly, but medieval patients understand that temporary suffering during treatment is preferable to permanent suffering from untreated disease. We'll begin immediately. Your father decides, understanding that delay serves no useful purpose and might allow the infection to progress beyond the point where even aggressive treatment can prove effective. Master Jeffrey begins preparing his instruments and medications with the kind of systematic efficiency that comes from years of performing complex medical procedures. His movements are confident and precise, suggesting extensive experience with similar cases and treatments that have proven successful, often enough to justify the pain, expense, and risk they involve. The bloodletting apparatus consists of sharp knives for making incisions, brass bowls for collecting blood, and small glass cups that will be heated and applied to your skin to draw out infected blood through suction. Medieval bloodletting is both an art and a science, requiring careful calculation of how much blood to remove, where to make incisions, and how to balance therapeutic benefits against the weakening effects of blood loss. This will hurt immediately and intensely. Master Jeffrey warns as he selects a knife and begins heating the glass cups. But the pain will serve a purpose. We're fighting for your life, and the infection won't surrender without a battle. Medieval patients developed psychological strategies for enduring medical procedures that would be considered torture by modern standards. Pain is accepted as an inevitable part of healing, and the ability to tolerate medical treatment without losing consciousness or composure is considered a virtue that reflects both physical strength and spiritual fortitude. Your father positions himself to hold you steady during the procedure, understanding that bloodletting requires patient cooperation and that sudden movements can turn controlled medical intervention into dangerous accidents. Medieval medical procedures are collaborative efforts between physician, patient, and family members who serve as assistance, restraints, and emotional support during treatment. Master Jeffrey makes the first incision along one of the dark lines spreading up your arm, cutting deeply enough to access the infected blood vessels, but carefully enough to avoid major arteries or other structures that could cause life-threatening complications. Medieval surgery requires extraordinary precision because there's no margin for error when operating without anesthesia, antibiotics, or modern surgical techniques. Blood flows immediately dark, thick fluid that carries the characteristic smell of serious infection. Master Jeffrey collects it in brass bowls while observing its color consistency and volume to assess the severity of the infection and determine how much bloodletting will be required. The blood is heavily corrupted, he observes, which confirms the diagnosis, but also indicates that aggressive treatment is necessary. We'll need to remove more infected blood than I initially estimated. Medieval physicians learned to interpret the visual and olfactory characteristics of bodily fluids as diagnostic indicators that guide treatment decisions. The appearance, smell, and consistency of your blood tells Master Jeffrey important information about the type and severity of infection he's treating. The hot glass cups are applied to the incision sites, creating suction that draws out additional infected blood, while the heat helps sterilize the wound area. The combination of cutting and cupping allows controlled removal of infected material while minimizing blood loss from healthy vessels. The pain is extraordinary, sharp burning agony that radiates through your entire arm and makes you understand why medieval people view serious medical treatment as a form of necessary torture. But you endure it because medieval patients learn that the alternative to painful treatment is usually death, and death is generally considered less desirable than temporary suffering. Master Jeffrey works with practiced efficiency, removing infected blood while monitoring your condition for signs that the procedure is helping or harming your overall health. Medieval physicians must balance aggressive treatment against the patient's ability to survive the treatment itself. Cure and kill are sometimes separated by very narrow margins. After removing what appears to be a substantial quantity of dark infected blood, Master Jeffrey moves to the next phase of treatment: cauterization, with hot iron instruments that will burn out whatever infectious organisms remain in the wound area. This will hurt worse than the bloodletting, he warns, producing iron rods that glow red hot from the brazier. But it's necessary to destroy the infection completely and create conditions that favor healing rather than continued corruption. Medieval cauterization serves multiple medical purposes. It sterilizes infected tissue, stops bleeding, and creates an environment that inhibits bacterial growth. While primitive by modern standards, it's often effective against the types of infections that medieval physicians encounter regularly. The hot iron touches your infected flesh with a sound like bacon hitting a hot pan, accompanied by pain that makes the bloodletting seem gentle by comparison. The smell of burning tissue fills the room, while Master Jeffrey works systematically to cauterize all infected areas, while preserving as much healthy tissue as possible. You grip the edges of the examination table and focus on breathing because losing consciousness during cauterization could result in incomplete treatment that allows the infection to return. Medieval patients develop remarkable tolerance for pain through necessity. Medical procedures hurt, but dying hurts worse and lasts longer. Master Jeffrey completes the cauterization and immediately begins applying medications to the treated area: honey for antibacterial action, herbal preparations that promote tissue healing, and powdered minerals that help prevent reinfection. Medieval wound care emphasizes creating optimal conditions for natural healing while preventing complications that could undermine successful treatment. The immediate danger is past, he announces, wrapping your arm in clean linen bandages that have been treated with additional medicinal preparations. The infection has been stopped, the corrupted tissue has been removed, and healing can begin. But recovery will require careful attention to wound care and several days of rest while your body repairs the damage. Medieval medical procedures often provide immediate relief from life-threatening conditions, but recovery requires extended periods of careful nursing care and gradual return to normal activities. Master Jeffrey's treatment has addressed the immediate crisis, but your arm will need time to heal from both the infection and the cure. You'll need to change the bandages daily. He instructs, providing additional medical supplies and detailed instructions for wound care. Keep the area clean and dry, apply fresh medications as directed, and return immediately if you develop fever, increased pain, or signs that the infection is returning. Medieval aftercare relies heavily on patient and family compliance with complex treatment regimens that require careful attention to detail and consistent execution over extended periods. Master Jeffrey's instructions reflect both medical necessity and the reality that recovery depends largely on the patient's ability to follow prescribed treatments without direct physician supervision. Your father pays the additional fees for medications and follow-up care, understanding that successful treatment requires investment in the complete therapeutic process rather than just the initial intervention. Medieval medicine is expensive because effective treatment often requires multiple components: diagnosis, immediate intervention medications, and extended aftercare. As you prepare to leave Master Jeffrey's house, your arm throbbing from recent medical intervention, but no longer burning with the relentless pain of advancing infection, you realize that medieval medicine has saved your life through techniques that are simultaneously primitive and sophisticated, painful and effective, expensive and necessary. The treatment has worked. You can feel the difference immediately. The dark lines have stopped spreading. The systemic symptoms are beginning to subside, and your arm feels like it's beginning to heal rather than continuing to deteriorate. Master Jeffrey's intervention has stopped a process that would certainly have killed you within days, but you've also learned that medieval medical emergencies require resources that can impoverish families, treatments that test the limits of human pain, tolerance, and outcomes that are never guaranteed despite significant investments in professional care. Medical survival in the medieval world requires not just access to skilled physicians, but the financial resources to afford their services and the physical resilience to survive their treatments. As you and your father begin the journey home, your arm carefully bandaged and your infection finally under control, you carry with you a new understanding of what medieval medicine can accomplish when resources, timing, and skill combine effectively, and what it costs to achieve those accomplishments. The journey home takes 2 days instead of one, partly because your father insists on a slower pace to accommodate your recovery, and partly because medieval travel with fresh medical wounds requires careful attention to rest wound care and the general process of healing, while managing the practical challenges of moving through a landscape that wasn't designed with injured people in mind. You spend the first night at a roadside inn that caters to travelers who need basic shelter food and the kind of minimal amenities that make medieval journeys bearable rather than life-threatening. The inn is exactly what you'd expect from medieval hospitality: a stone building with thick walls, small windows, and interior spaces that prioritize function over comfort while providing protection from weather bandits and the various hazards that make overnight travel dangerous for people who can't afford armed escorts. The common room serves as dining area, social center, and sleeping accommodation for travelers who can't afford private chambers. You and your father share a meal of bread, cheese, and ale while sitting at wooden tables scarred by years of use and surrounded by other travelers who are managing their own medieval journeys with varying degrees of success and comfort. Medieval inns attract diverse clientele: merchants transporting goods between towns, craftsmen traveling to find work or deliver specialized services, religious pilgrims seeking spiritual fulfillment through uncomfortable journeys, and people like yourselves who are dealing with medical emergencies that require travel to access professional care. Everyone has stories, but medieval etiquette discourages too much curiosity about other people's business. Your arm throbs steadily under Master Jeffrey's bandages, but the pain feels different now, like tissue healing rather than infection spreading, like temporary discomfort rather than progressive disaster. The medicines he applied create a constant medicinal smell that mingles with wood smoke, cooking food, and the general mustiness that characterizes all medieval indoor spaces. Medieval wound care requires constant attention to cleanliness, moisture control, and the application of medications that promote healing while preventing reinfection. You change the bandages as Master Jeffrey instructed, carefully cleaning the wound area and applying fresh medicines that sting initially but provide the kind of therapeutic benefit that justifies temporary discomfort. The cauterized tissue looks exactly like what it is: flesh that's been deliberately burned to destroy infection and create conditions that favor healing rather than continued corruption. It's raw, painful, and somewhat disturbing to examine, but it's also clearly beginning the process of tissue repair that will eventually restore function to your arm. Medieval healing operates on time frames that modern people would find frustratingly slow: days for initial tissue repair, weeks for functional recovery, and months for complete healing that restores full strength and mobility. But medieval people understand that serious medical conditions require patience, consistent care, and the kind of gradual progress that can't be rushed without risking complications that could undermine successful treatment. Your father monitors your condition with the kind of careful attention that medieval families apply to medical emergencies, checking for fever, observing wound healing, and watching for signs that infection might be returning despite Master Jeffrey's treatment. Medieval aftercare relies heavily on family members who serve as amateur nurses, medication administrators, and early warning systems for complications that require additional professional intervention. The inn's proprietor, a weathered woman named Catherine, who's seen enough travelers to recognize medical situations, provides additional care that goes beyond basic hospitality. She offers herbal preparations that supplement Master Jeffrey's medications advice about wound care based on her experience treating injured travelers, and the kind of practical support that makes recovery possible in environments that aren't designed for medical care. Infected wounds are dangerous, she observes, examining your bandages with professional competence, but university physicians know how to treat them when families can afford proper care. You're fortunate to have reached Master Jeffrey before the corruption spread too far to stop. Medieval communities develop informal networks of medical knowledge and support that supplement professional health care and provide backup resources when trained physicians aren't available. Catherine has treated enough medical emergencies to recognize serious conditions and understand the difference between effective and inadequate treatment. Many travelers arrive here with infections. She continues preparing herbal drinks that smell medicinal and taste like concentrated plant matter, but most can't afford physician consultation and try to manage with folk remedies that aren't adequate for serious conditions. They usually die within days, and we bury them in the field behind the inn. This reflects the medieval reality that access to effective medical care depends largely on financial resources and geographic proximity to trained physicians. Most people with serious infections never receive treatment that could save their lives, and medieval graveyards are filled with people who died from conditions that were medically treatable but economically inaccessible. The herbal drink Catherine provides tastes bitter, but helps with pain management and general recovery. Medieval folk medicine includes genuinely effective treatments that complement professional medical care and provide affordable alternatives when physician consultation isn't possible or necessary. Sleep comes fitfully interrupted by pain from your healing wounds and the general discomfort of medieval travel accommodations. The inn provides straw mattresses that are cleaner than most medieval bedding, but still host populations of insects, mites, and other small creatures that consider human guests an opportunity for feeding rather than a reason for discretion. Medieval sleep is never completely restful. There's always pain, discomfort, noise, or worry to interrupt unconsciousness and remind you that survival requires constant attention to potential problems. But your body is beginning to heal, and rest helps the recovery process, even when it's not particularly comfortable or refreshing. Dawn brings the second day of travel, with your condition improved enough to continue the journey home, but still requiring careful management of pain fatigue and the practical challenges of moving through countryside while recovering from major medical treatment. Your father maintains a steady pace that balances the need to reach home with the reality that pushing too hard could interfere with healing. The landscape through which you travel is the same countryside you've known all your life, but recovery from serious illness provides a different perspective on familiar surroundings. Medieval people developed deep connections to local geography through daily exposure to seasonal changes, weather patterns, and the subtle variations that mark the passage of time in communities that exist close to natural cycles. You notice details that normally escape attention, the way morning light falls across fields that have been harvested and prepared for winter, the sounds of birds preparing for seasonal migration, the smells of wood smoke and damp earth that characterize November in rural England. Medieval recovery often includes increased awareness of environmental details as the mind emerges from the focus required to manage medical crises. Your arm continues to heal steadily with pain that decreases gradually rather than disappearing completely. Medieval healing is incremental rather than dramatic tissue. Repair happens slowly, function returns gradually, and full recovery requires patience with processes that can't be rushed without risking complications. As you approach your home village, you can see smoke rising from cottage chimneys and hear the familiar sounds of daily life: cattle lowing, roosters crowing, people calling to each other across yards and fields. Medieval communities developed distinctive acoustic signatures that allow residents to identify their home settlements from considerable distances. Your cottage appears exactly as you left it 2 days ago, but returning from a medical emergency provides a different perspective on familiar surroundings. The building looks smaller and more fragile than you remembered, a reminder that medieval homes are temporary shelters rather than permanent foundations, and that families survive through adaptability rather than security. Agnes meets you at the door, her own cough significantly improved through your mother's careful nursing and Marguerite's herbal treatments. Medieval families often manage multiple medical emergencies simultaneously, and your sister's recovery demonstrates that folk medicine can be effective for conditions that don't require university-trained intervention. "How is your arm?" she asks, examining your bandages with the curiosity that medieval children develop about medical procedures and healing processes through exposure to family illnesses and community medical emergencies. Healing, you reply, which is both accurate and optimistic, given the severity of the infection that nearly killed you just days ago. Medieval recovery is often measured in small improvements rather than dramatic transformations, and gradual progress represents significant medical success. Your mother examines your wounds with the competence that medieval women develop through years of managing family health care and medical emergencies. She approves of Master Jeffrey's treatment techniques, recognizes the quality of his medications, and understands the aftercare requirements that will support continued healing. University physicians know their craft. She observes carefully changing your bandages and applying fresh medicines, but their fees could bankrupt ordinary families. We're fortunate that your condition was serious enough to justify the expense, and that Master Jeffrey's treatment worked quickly enough to prevent worse complications. Medieval families make complex calculations about medical expenses, balancing the cost of treatment against the value of family members' lives and the long-term financial impact of medical emergencies. Your treatment was expensive but successful, which makes it a good investment despite the significant cost. Marguerite arrives to examine your healing wounds and provide additional herbal preparations that will supplement Master Geoffrey's medications. Medieval medical care often involves collaboration between university-trained physicians and folk healers, combining theoretical knowledge with practical experience to provide comprehensive treatment. The university physician did excellent work. She assesses, examining the cauterized tissue and noting the signs of healthy healing. The infection has been completely eliminated and tissue repairs proceeding normally. You should recover full function within several weeks, assuming you follow proper aftercare procedures. Medieval healing requires patient compliance with complex treatment regimens that extend far beyond immediate medical intervention. Recovery depends on consistent wound care, appropriate rest, gradual return to normal activities, and careful attention to signs that might indicate complications requiring additional treatment. But Marguerite continues university medicine addresses symptoms rather than causes. Master Geoffrey treated your infection successfully, but he didn't investigate why you developed such a serious condition from what appeared to be a minor wound. This reflects the medieval understanding that effective healthcare requires attention to both immediate medical problems and underlying factors that contribute to illness and injury. Folk medicine often emphasizes prevention, lifestyle factors, and environmental conditions that affect health, while university medicine focuses on treating specific diseases and conditions. Show me where you first noticed the infection. Marguerite requests beginning an investigation that will examine your daily activities, work environment, and potential exposure sources to identify factors that might have contributed to the development of serious infection from what should have been a minor injury. You describe your routine activities, helping with dental procedures, caring for livestock, working around the cottage and village, while Marguerite asks detailed questions about specific exposures, injury mechanisms, and environmental factors that might explain why a small wound developed into a life-threatening infection. Medieval folk medicine operates on the principle that understanding causes is essential for preventing recurrence, and that effective healthcare requires attention to the complex interactions between individuals and their environments. Marguerite's investigation reflects both medical curiosity and practical concern about preventing similar infections in other community members. Your father's dental tools, she concludes after systematic questioning about your activities in the days before the infection appeared, aren't being cleaned properly between patients. You've been handling instruments that are contaminated with infected material from other people's mouths, and the contamination entered your body through a small cut on your arm. Medieval dental practice involves constant exposure to infected material from patients' mouths, and inadequate sterilization of instruments can transfer bacteria, viruses, and other infectious agents between patients and practitioners. Your infection likely resulted from occupational exposure to contaminated medical equipment. We clean the tools with wine and hot water. Your father protests, defending his professional hygiene practices against suggestions that they're inadequate for preventing cross-contamination between patients. Wine and hot water remove visible contamination, Marguerite explains, but they don't eliminate the invisible corruptions that can cause serious infections. University physicians have developed techniques for sterilizing medical instruments that go beyond traditional cleaning methods. Medieval sterilization techniques are evolving as medical knowledge advances, but many practitioners still rely on traditional methods that are adequate for routine cleaning but insufficient for eliminating infectious agents that can cause serious illness. Folk healers often possess knowledge about infection prevention that supplements university medical training. Master Jeffrey explained proper instrument sterilization while treating Thomas, your father admits. His techniques are more complex than traditional methods, but they're necessary for preventing the kind of infection that nearly killed my son. Medieval medical practice improves through the exchange of knowledge between different types of healers, with university physicians, folk healers, and practical practitioners learning from each other's experience and expertise. Your medical emergency has resulted in improved hygiene practices that will prevent similar infections in future patients. Marguerite provides detailed instructions for sterilizing dental instruments using techniques that combine traditional cleaning methods with more advanced procedures that eliminate infectious agents. Medieval instrument sterilization involves heating, chemical treatment, and storage methods that prevent contamination while maintaining the tool's effectiveness for medical procedures. Proper sterilization takes more time and effort, she explains, but it prevents the kind of medical emergencies that cost families far more than improved hygiene practices. Prevention is always less expensive than treatment and much less painful for everyone involved. Medieval healthcare operates on the principle that preventing disease is more effective and economical than treating illness after it develops. Your family's medical emergency demonstrates both the importance of effective treatment when prevention fails and the value of improved practices that prevent similar problems in the future. Over the following weeks, your arm heals steadily under the combined care of Master Jeffrey's medical treatment, Marguerite's herbal remedies, and your family's careful attention to wound care and recovery management. Medieval healing is collaborative rather than individual, involving multiple types of healers and extensive family support. The recovery process provides opportunities to observe medieval healing and action tissue repair that happens gradually but consistently, pain that decreases slowly but steadily, and function that returns incrementally as damaged structures rebuild themselves. Medieval healing operates on biological timelines rather than human preferences, but it's remarkably effective when properly supported. Your father implements improved sterilization procedures for his dental instruments using techniques that combine traditional cleaning methods with more advanced procedures that prevent cross-contamination between patients. Medieval professional practices evolve through experience, often motivated by medical emergencies that demonstrate the inadequacy of traditional methods. Agnes recovers completely from her respiratory infection through herbal treatment and nursing care, demonstrating that folk medicine can be highly effective for conditions that don't require university-trained intervention. Medieval families often manage multiple medical problems simultaneously, using whatever resources are available and appropriate for each condition. The family's finances recover slowly from the expensive physician consultation, but the investment in effective medical treatment proves worthwhile as you return to productive work and the family's income-generating capacity is restored. Medieval medical expenses represent significant short-term costs but often provide long-term benefits that justify the initial investment. 6 weeks after your infection nearly killed you, your arm has healed completely with full function restored and no lasting complications from either the disease or its treatment. Medieval medicine has saved your life through a combination of professional expertise, family support, and folk wisdom that demonstrates the effectiveness of comprehensive health care when resources and knowledge are properly applied. The experience has taught you valuable lessons about medieval medical reality, that serious conditions require immediate professional treatment regardless of cost, that effective healing involves multiple types of care and knowledge, and that prevention through improved practices is always preferable to treatment of established disease. Medieval medicine works when it works, but it requires resources, knowledge, and support systems that aren't available to everyone who needs them. Your survival represents both medical success and social privilege, access to physician care that most medieval people can't afford, family support that makes recovery possible, and community resources that provide comprehensive health care when individual needs exceed individual means. As winter deepens and your arm functions normally in daily work, you carry with you a new understanding of medieval medical reality and a deep appreciation for the complex systems of knowledge support and resource allocation that make survival possible in an era where disease, injury, and death are constant threats that require constant vigilance and occasional miracles to overcome. The dark spot that nearly killed you has become a small scar that serves as a permanent reminder of how quickly medieval life can transition from routine to life-threatening, and how effectively medieval medicine can respond to serious medical emergencies when families have access to the resources and knowledge required for comprehensive treatment. Medieval healing has worked, but at a cost that reflects both the value of human life and the complex realities of healthcare in an era where effective treatment requires significant investments in professional knowledge, expensive procedures, and extended recovery support that challenges the resources of ordinary families. So here you are 6 months later, your arm bearing only a small scar where death once tried to establish permanent residence. Spring has returned to the English countryside, bringing with it the familiar rhythms of planting, lambing, and the general optimism that accompanies survival through another medieval winter. Your father's dental practice continues to thrive now, enhanced by improved sterilization techniques that prevent the kind of cross-contamination that nearly cost you your life. Agnes has grown stronger through the winter, her respiratory infection just a memory marked by improved lung capacity and the kind of casual resilience that medieval children develop through surviving whatever illnesses their environment provides. She's learned to help your mother with increasingly complex household tasks, and her cough has been replaced by the kind of robust health that suggests she'll survive to adulthood despite the statistical odds that medieval mortality rates impose on families like yours. Brunhilde the cow has maintained her dedication to producing milk sporadically and with great reluctance, but she's alive, which by medieval livestock standards represents a significant achievement. She's developed what might charitably be called a relationship with you, recognizing your voice and occasionally acknowledging your presence with the kind of bovine attention that suggests either affection or the hope that you're carrying food. Your mother continues managing the household with the kind of quiet competence that keeps medieval families functional despite the best efforts of weather economics and general existence to make survival impossible. She's added medical knowledge to her already extensive repertoire of skills, learning wound care, herbal preparation, and the kind of diagnostic observation that allows families to recognize serious medical problems before they become fatal emergencies. The village itself has prospered modestly through the winter, with no major outbreaks of disease, no devastating fires, and no visits from raiders, tax collectors, or other representatives of authority who might disrupt the delicate balance that allows medieval communities to function. Several babies were born. A few elderly people died peacefully, and life continued with the kind of routine success that medieval people consider remarkable good fortune. But your experience with serious illness and university medicine has changed your perspective on medieval healthcare in ways that extend far beyond personal recovery. You've seen what medieval medicine can accomplish when knowledge, resources, and skill combine effectively, and you've also learned what it costs financially, physically, and emotionally to achieve those accomplishments. Master Jeffrey's treatment saved your life through techniques that were simultaneously primitive and sophisticated, painful and effective, expensive and necessary. Medieval medicine operates on principles that modern people would find both fascinating and horrifying, but it works within the technological and theoretical limitations of its era to provide genuine healing for people who desperately need medical intervention. The bloodletting that removed infected material from your arm was based on humoral theory that modern medicine has discarded, but it was also an effective technique for reducing bacterial load and improving circulation in infected tissue. The cauterization that burned out remaining infection was brutal by contemporary standards, but it sterilized tissue and created conditions that promoted healing rather than continued deterioration. Medieval pharmaceuticals combined genuinely effective substances, honey, for antibacterial action herbs, with proven anti-inflammatory properties, minerals that promote tissue healing, with ingredients that were useless or harmful but traditional in medical practice. Master Jeffrey's medicines worked because medieval physicians had access to centuries of accumulated knowledge about which treatments were effective even when they didn't understand the mechanisms that made them work. Your recovery demonstrates that medieval medicine could achieve remarkable results when practiced by skilled physicians who combined university training with practical experience, and when patients had access to the financial resources required for comprehensive treatment. But your experience also highlights the limitations that made effective medical care inaccessible to most medieval people most of the time. The cost of Master Jeffrey's treatment represented months of your father's income and required the family to make financial sacrifices that affected everyone's standard of living for an extended period. Medieval physician consultation was expensive because trained doctors were rare. Their education required years of study at costly institutions, and their expertise commanded premium prices from desperate patients. Most medieval people with serious infections never received treatment that could save their lives, not because effective treatments didn't exist, but because those treatments were economically inaccessible to ordinary families. Medieval graveyards are filled with people who died from conditions that were medically treatable but financially impossible for their families to address. Geographic accessibility was another crucial factor that determined whether medical emergencies resulted in recovery or death. Your village was fortunate to be within a day's travel of a university-trained physician, but many medieval communities were weeks away from professional medical care, making it impossible to reach treatment in time to address rapidly developing conditions. Medieval medicine also required support systems that extended far beyond individual physician consultation. Your recovery depended on family members who provided nursing care, community healers who supplemented professional treatment with folk remedies, and social networks that offered practical assistance during medical emergencies. Marguerite's knowledge of herbal medicine proved essential for managing pain, promoting healing, and preventing complications that could have undermined Master Jeffrey's treatment. Medieval healthcare often involved collaboration between different types of healers, with university physicians, folk healers, and practical practitioners contributing different elements of comprehensive care. Your family's ability to provide extended nursing care during recovery was crucial for successful healing, but it also demonstrated the economic impact that medical emergencies imposed on medieval households. Someone had to tend wounds, administer medications, prepare special foods, and monitor healing progress, taking time away from income-generating activities and household management responsibilities. Medieval communities developed informal support networks that helped families manage medical emergencies that exceeded individual resources. But these systems worked best for people who were already integrated into village social structures and could reciprocate assistance when others faced similar crises. The investigation that identified the source of your infection, contaminated dental instruments, illustrates both the sophistication of medieval medical thinking and the practical challenges of implementing effective prevention strategies. Medieval healers understood that diseases had causes that could be identified and addressed, but translating that knowledge into consistent prevention practices required resources and commitment that weren't always available. Your father's adoption of improved sterilization techniques represents the kind of practical medical advancement that medieval medicine achieved through the accumulation of experience and the sharing of knowledge between different types of practitioners. Medical practice evolved constantly as healers learned from successes and failures, incorporating new techniques that proved effective while abandoning practices that didn't work. Medieval medicine was simultaneously more sophisticated and more limited than modern people often realize. Medieval physicians possessed extensive knowledge about anatomy, disease processes, and therapeutic techniques that were genuinely effective within the technological constraints of their era. They could perform complex surgeries, treat serious infections, and manage medical conditions that required sophisticated understanding of human physiology. But medieval medicine was also constrained by theoretical frameworks that were sometimes incorrect, technological limitations that made diagnosis and treatment more difficult, and social systems that made effective medical care accessible only to those with adequate financial resources and geographic proximity to skilled practitioners. Your experience with medieval medical emergency and recovery provides insight into both the possibilities and limitations of healthcare in an era when survival depended on the successful navigation of complex systems of knowledge, resources, and social support that determined whether medical crises resulted in healing or death. Medieval medicine saved your life, but it did so within a healthcare system that was simultaneously more personal and more precarious than modern medical care. Your treatment involved direct relationships with healers who knew your family and community, but it also required financial and social resources that weren't available to everyone who needed them. The scar on your arm serves as a permanent reminder of how quickly medieval life could transition from routine to life-threatening, and how effectively medieval medicine could respond to serious emergencies when families had access to the knowledge, resources, and support systems required for comprehensive treatment. Medieval healing worked through the combination of professional expertise, family dedication, community support, and the kind of collaborative effort that modern medicine has replaced with institutional systems and technological interventions. Your recovery represents both medical success and social privilege, access to resources and knowledge that made survival possible in circumstances where many medieval people would have died. As you work beside your father, helping with dental procedures that now incorporate improved infection prevention techniques, you carry with you a deeper understanding of medieval medical reality and an appreciation for the complex systems that made healing possible in an era when effective healthcare required not just medical knowledge, but social networks, economic resources, and the kind of community cooperation that allowed families to survive medical emergencies that exceeded individual capabilities. Medieval medicine was both cruder and more sophisticated than modern people often realize, both more limited and more effective than contemporary healthcare systems, both more personal and more precarious than the institutional medicine that has replaced it. Your experience demonstrates that medieval healing could achieve remarkable results, but only when multiple systems of knowledge, support, and resources aligned to provide comprehensive care for people who desperately needed medical intervention. The medieval world was indeed a place where minor injuries could become fatal infections, where pain was managed through tolerance rather than pharmaceutical intervention, and where medical emergencies could impoverish families even when treatment was successful. But it was also a world where skilled healers could save lives through techniques that combined scientific knowledge with practical experience, where communities supported families through medical crises that exceeded individual resources, and where recovery was possible when knowledge, dedication, and resources combined effectively to address serious medical conditions. Your survival represents both the possibilities and limitations of medieval medicine, what it could accomplish when practiced skillfully and supported adequately, and what it required from patients, families, and communities who faced medical emergencies in an era when effective healthcare demanded significant personal and social investment in the complex process of healing. Medieval medicine worked, but it worked within systems and constraints that modern people can barely imagine. Your story demonstrates both the remarkable capabilities of medieval healers and the extraordinary challenges that medieval people faced when serious illness threatened not just individual survival, but family stability and community well-being. Tonight, as you settle into sleep in your dry cottage with your healed arm and your surviving family, perhaps you'll spare a thought for the medieval physicians, folk healers, and wise women who developed the knowledge and techniques that made recovery possible in an era when medical emergencies were tests of not just physical resilience, but social resources, economic stability, and the kind of community cooperation that allowed individuals to survive challenges that exceeded their personal capabilities. Medieval medicine saved your life, and in doing so, it demonstrated both the remarkable achievements and the profound limitations of healthcare in an era when healing required not just medical knowledge, but courage, dedication, and the kind of collaborative effort that made survival possible in a world where death was always close at hand, but life was still worth fighting for. And so ends our journey through the gruesome, fascinating, and ultimately hopeful world of medieval medicine, a world where pain and healing, knowledge and ignorance, hope and despair intertwined in ways that modern medicine has largely eliminated, but which medieval people navigated with the kind of resilience, wisdom, and determination that made survival possible, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Sweet dreams.